Good morning, everyone. And actually, it's probably good afternoon, good evening for those on the live stream all over the world. Yeah, my name is Sally O'Halloran, and I suppose the first thing I'm going to say is, I'm not as funny as John Little. Come on, of all the people to have to follow. Talk about a timetable getting changed, and you think you're following the best moderator. So the pressure's on, team. That was a really entertaining and, informative session. So yeah, my name is Sally O'Halloran, and I know quite a lot of you, but I'm an associate professor in the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, which is a nature-based university south of Oslo, and I spend a lot of my time teaching landscape architects and landscape engineers about plant selection. So this is a topic very close to my heart, so I'm excited about kind of having a diverse panel that we will sort of talk through it today. But I think the first thing which would be useful is if everyone introduces themselves. But I suppose because I'm an academic, it's quite nice if you can maybe use like 3 key words that are sort of your key focus, so that the audience, because we can talk during the breaks, if they want to talk to you about stuff, we'll know kind of what your sort of key ideas are. Mm-hmm. So, Jo, do you want to go first?
Thanks for starting with me. I suppose if I'm going to choose 3 key words, I think the thing that we probably all have in common would be ecology. For me, another important word is brownfield. That's what I garden on at the moment. And another really important word is hyperlocal or vernacular. I mean, you choose how you want to understand that word, but that's a really important word for me. So just a little bit about myself. I'm, garden designer and also a gardener. But 12 years ago, I bought a brownfield site in Somerset. And when I initially bought it, I bought it because I was really, really interested in vernacular wildflowers, indigenous wildflowers. And I thought that this was a really great opportunity to kind of like experiment with that. And then when I got there, I actually realized what Benedict and John had just been talking about is the brownfield site had been inhabited, become inhabited over the time. And what I was dealing with was a very complex ecosystem. And I had to decide whether I was going to completely annihilate that or try and work with it. And I think it's really important now as gardeners and designers to try and work with what we find, to try and understand what we're finding and try and work with place. The whole place is a little bit of an experiment of, can you do that? How much do you have to let go, and how much do you have to bring back? And sharing that knowledge, I think this is really, really important now for us to kind of like start divesting from trying to make instant landscapes that instantly do this and instantly do that, and try and work out how we work with process to get to a better place.
Yeah.
If we're going to get to a progressive ecological horticulture, we need to start thinking slightly differently.
Yeah. Okay, and we'll explore that further. Yeah. Alex.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, I first have to say how much of a pleasure it is to be here, because I came to the conference last time and I was still a student, and I remember sitting somewhere up there looking at all the really knowledgeable people in this room and thinking, shit, I must never end up on that stage. But that didn't play out. No, but my 3 words would be ecology, Norwegian climate, because I'm also working at the same university as Sally, and stressful urban environments, I think.
Is that about 10 words?
Less than you.
Can you just say something about your background, Alex, as well?
Yeah. So I studied at the University of Sheffield, landscape architecture and ecology, and I was taught by yourself and Nigel Dunnett and James Hitchmo, I'm sure you've heard of. So I'm kind of, by default, one of their disciples, if you know what I mean. And then, I've just always been interested in how we can put nature into cities and give it to the biggest number of people possible. Because there's lots of people that aren't as privileged as us to have gardens and this kind of obsession. So that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah. And Chris?
Thank you, Sally. Well, I'm Chris Gibson. Naturalist, conservationist, ecologist. My 3 words in a nutshell. I started off doing a PhD more years ago than I like to imagine. It's 40 odd years ago, studying the parasitic behaviour of yellow rattle. Then a career in statutory nature conservation, and now, for my sins, I'm the wildlife advocate to and for Beth Chatto Gardens.
Okay, good, yeah. Okay, speaking of which, I'm going to start with maybe a controversial question, but I will frame it diplomatically. I think Sheila Das actually summed it up really well at the end of the day, where she kind of listed all the things we had learned yesterday and all the things we now have to think about with designing and plant selection. And one of the terms we're using all the time is right plant, right place. So I do want to kind of question, is that concept, is that statement still relevant today? Because there are all these other things we need to think about. So Joe, what do you think?
We sort of slightly talked about this beforehand, and my initial answer was yes, of course it's relevant. Yeah, but understanding plants as ecological systems, as also social beings that live in communities is really, really important, and that's what that terminology was all about. It's about understanding where plants come from originally in the wild, how they live in communities in the wild, and then trying to sort of put that plant in the right place when you're designing a garden. And then something was kind of like irking and sort of like going, no, that's wrong. And then I was thinking about what Merlin was saying, and he was saying, no, you really need to think right place, right indigenous microorganisms, right plant. And I was thinking, yeah, that sounds right, because from my point of view, gardening on a brownfield site, a very low nutrient site, what I've learned is that plants really need to adapt themselves to site, and so they need the opportunity to be autonomous, to be self-sowing. We all know that if a parent plant can grow on a site and then set seed, within that seed is the biome of the soil, and so therefore that seed can adapt itself better to that particular soil biome, and so that seed will be better adapted to changes in climate, to all the things that plant needs in order to survive. And it's the indigenous microorganisms that adapt that plant to place. So yeah, that's right. And then I was thinking, no, that's the thing that was bothering me. It's that term right. Because if you use that term right, then you're implying there's a wrong. And I feel that that's where we've come a little bit unstuck in our thinking about things. We're very obsessed with binary, aren't we? We're very obsessed with outcome as an industry. And when we're delivering stuff, we talk about delivering. And it's that thing of kind of like native, non-native, wild, cultivated, human, nature. If we keep on boxing everything and conventionalizing everything, we're never going to get to the progressive horticulture that accepts ecosystem and accepts ecological stuff as needing to be considered within the design process. And that means allowing a lessening of control and allowing those things that Benedict and John were talking about, a little bit more dynamism, a little bit more unpredictability, a little bit of that to come in. I think we're all a little bit scared of that, because it means that we can't say it will definitely be like this, and we're losing control of a kind of delivering a instant garden, which we're all really heavily invested in as an industry. So I really like everybody to try and kind of like move away from that and kind of find the joy in the kind of unpredictability of stuff, and the joy in making it more goal-led. Yeah. Well, not in being wrong, but in being in having a multiplicity of possibilities, and seeing and working with that in a relationship way. Like, I work with the garden, we work with the process. We're not trying to like really nail the process to the ground,
Yeah, yeah.
because that is going to be battling nature.
Yeah.
And we're all now supposedly committed to not doing that,
Yeah.
aren't we? And working in a different way.
Yeah.
But it is going to be counterintuitive. And sometimes I think what we'll get is people railing against it and saying, well, that's problematic because, more than anything else, because a client expects something,
Yeah.
a delivery of something.
Yeah.
And it's up to us to change that sales technique.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Sorry.
But we still, yeah. I mean, Alex, I don't know if you've come through education, like it's a term that's been going around for a long time, but I don't know whether you've come through education with us kind of ever saying it to you, or if it's a philosophy you follow.
Yeah, I mean, it was always like habitat reference theory. That's what right plant, right place means to me. It's about looking at a plant growing in its natural habitat and then trying to match the conditions in the design setting or whatever. But I think we're actually getting quite good at that, especially for people in this room. So I think we could maybe take it further and say, right cultivar, right ecotype, right regional population, right place. Because there's such a huge genetic diversity within a species. So for example, in the east of Norway, in Oslo, it can be minus 20 degrees. And in the west coast,
Don't remind me.
it can be minus 2. So that's a huge climatic variation. And the species like Oregon and Vulgar is growing across the whole width of the country. So of course it's going to be different in the east compared to the west. So we need to stop seeing species as a single unit, but understand this spectrum.
Can I butt in there and just say, is that then a problem to get something that will adapt itself very well to place from a nursery system, which it just creates some, again, we're going back to that, what Benedict was saying, homogeneity is the thing that deprives habitat of the ability to adapt to place.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Because a project in Oslo will source plants from Bergen or Stavanger, where it's minus 2, and then going to minus 20, it's a huge difference. And of course, it's really difficult for landscape architects and garden designers. I'm not expecting everyone to be so geeky as I am, but I think the people growing the plants, the nurseries, should be kind of somewhat aware of where the genetic material is coming from that they're selling and try and communicate it to us.
I mean, there are people in this room who run nurseries. So yesterday we were telling them, you know, don't use peat, we've got to move away from that. Are you now telling them that they have to source seed from local populations, start growing that when they have a stock that they're used to growing? I mean, is that the future?
In the Norwegian context, I think that is the future.
Why?
So we're already starting to see projects having contract-grown plants. You know, the project, the ecologist involved will say, we need plants grown from the Oslo commune, nowhere else in the country. And then people are having to go out and collect seeds from the area, grow them on, you know, a year or two in advance, and then that's supplying the plant material. Yeah. But I know it's a bit of a hurdle, but I think we just need to start thinking about it and talking about it, and slowly it'll become more important. You know, just like ask the nursery when you're buying a plant, even if you don't really care.
But it is
just
interesting
say,
that
do you know where
somebody
it came from?
like Peter, somebody like Peter actually ends up making his own plants.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and we're using sort of different vocabulary the last few days. So you say vernacular, yesterday was bioregionality. Chris, what sort of words do you use? What's the kind of vocabulary for all of this?
Well, it's words you don't use, actually. What's important to me, as you know, I've just written a book.
Subtle plug there.
Absolutely, subtle plug. $12.99, available from all good booksellers, including the Beth Chatto shop. It's a new identification guide to British and Irish wildflowers. It's an interesting guide, I think. It has a golden thread running through it, so you can actually start at the beginning and work out at the destination where you are, the plant, the identity. It's It's a book which doesn't do various things. It's not a flick and pick. It's not, as we heard from lucidly from Peter yesterday, it's not the crap from the app. It is a book which helps you learn as you go through. So that's important. But that's an aside, really. The thing about this book, it is British and Irish wildflowers in the wild, irrespective of provenance. Advisedly, we do not use the terms native, non-native, indigenous, alien, or anything like that. Make no reference to that whatsoever. It's irrelevant to identification. It is... All those terms are so loaded with baggage.
Yeah, it is true. Yeah.
And we, as botanists, are, as with all areas of human bigotry, we tend to assume the wrong things. So, native is good, alien is bad. That's not true. Now, take native plants like bracken. It's a thug. We want to get rid of it in places. Alien plants, non-native plants, take Alexanders. That's the plant which, here in the Essex countryside, gives the gift of nectar and pollen earlier in the season to all of the insects than any other plant. We would not be what we are without it. So native alien is really a concept which I think is completely outdated and shouldn't really be thought about. What we should be thinking about, as Joe's already alluded to, is localism, hyperlocalism, potentially, because that's bringing the real sense of the plant in its place.
Yeah. So you have, like, landscape architects, landscape designers now, for example, have your book with 750 plants in it.
Yep.
So a lot of this audience are designing in cities, in really stressful urban context. I suppose, Alex, maybe you're the kind of landscape architect background. How do you know then what plants to use from that book in rain gardens, green roofs, all these kind of novel ecosystems, I suppose we're calling them now? How would you sort of convert that information?
I mean, there's either the geeky landscape architects who are obsessed with this and go for years and years trying to look at these plants in the wild and read the book and etc., etc. Or you have the majority of landscape architects who don't have time, who have never heard of this book, who have never seen a flora book. And that's where it's a big challenge. And that's what part of my PhD is about. Or, to be honest, that's the purpose of my PhD is trying to give guidance to landscape architects who have this big, massive flora book in front of them of native plants. And they're trying to figure out how to go through the native flora and choose which plants to use where.
Yeah, so for example, because you've started your PhD, you're looking at rain gardens in particular.
Yeah.
So, like, what's the first step?
It's going back to the right plant, right place.
Yeah.
But trying to see which semi-natural or natural habitats we think have the most similar conditions to those in rain gardens. So, for example, I've spent a lot of time looking at coastal sites, coastal kind of beach meadows, because in Norway they have lots and lots of salt going on the roads all throughout winter. And then the salt is getting washed into the rain gardens and it's creating quite a saline habitat. So then you think, okay, where's that similar to in the wild? Kind of beaches and coastal environments. Yeah. So that's the first step.
Yeah.
Where do these plants grow in a similar place?
Yeah, and what urban conditions are similar to the wild. Yeah, it's not picking up the habitat in the wild and dropping it into the city. It's more complex than that.
Totally.
Yeah. So I know there's going to be people in the audience going, why are they talking about native plants so much? But it is kind of a big topic. And I suppose, like, when we go to other countries, we're much more excited about other people's native flora. Like, how do we get people... Because it is both. I think we will all agree that there isn't enough, but, like, how do we get people excited about it Joe?
I think that is a difficulty definitely in this country. I think Chris was talking about the baggage, but we're also talking about, the UK has the ignominious title of being one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world now. 1 in 6 of our wild species, and many of them are plants, are under risk of extinction. I don't think we're really even seeing them anymore. I often am told, well, it's really boring. Our native plants are really boring, and they're not very exciting. And if we work with just the local and the hyper-local, we're just going to get a load of grasses. But that's probably because we don't actually know what they are and don't actually know what they look like anymore. Partly, but it's also I think there's another thing that needs to be accepted here. We all really want people to re-engage, don't we? We want them to re-engage and feel like part of nature. And we want people to notice the decline, notice the extinction. So unless we start putting value on these plants, and that means putting value on them in a cultural way. And if you put them in a garden and a gardenscape, you're saying, I value these things. I value their genetic diversity. I value their wildness. I value who they are intrinsically as things. And then you're sort of encouraging people to see that as having aesthetic value, but also cultural value to us as human beings. And then when people garden design, they might put them in, but they also, when they go down the road and they see something flailed or a plastic lawn, or a load of plastic plants, which seem to be ubiquitous at the moment, or something glyphosated within an inch of its life in the local playground, they might begin to ask questions, because they might begin to understand what they're losing.
Yeah.
But in order to understand, what that Robert McFarlane thing is, in order to understand what you're losing, you have to really give people the opportunity to see it. Yeah. And fall in love with it. And that's our big job as garden designers, make people fall in love with habitat.
Yeah, because we had that quote yesterday, I think it was Alice, is thinking local to think global. Yeah. So, we're obviously all talking to each other, we've had loads of lectures, but are there resources? Is there somewhere to visit? Are there books? Like, Alex, what do you use? What's a good source of information that you'd recommend to the audience?
The first time I come across a plant I haven't heard of is I just look on Plants of the World, Q Plants of the World. You go online, and quite often you can see where the species is distributed across the whole world. And for me, that's already like a really useful piece of information, especially when we're talking about native plants. Is it native or not? And if it is native, where else is it growing? Is it growing in Southern Europe? Is it growing in America? So that's one really useful thing. And then in terms of books and things, I think we do just have to kind of bite the bullet and look at some of these nitty-gritty native flora books. This is probably a good one, but the Norwegian ones, they're like this big. And I think we just have to start getting used to looking at them and taking them with us.
Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, well, for me, there's two things. There's the resource of actually getting engaged, as Joe says. We've got to get engaged with plants. Now, as I've said, I started as a plant scientist. Plants were something to be researched. They were to be looked at in a dispassionate way. One thing happened to me, a light bulb moment 40 years ago, when Richard Mabey, who we'll be hearing from later today, published his book, Flowering of Britain. Most beautiful evocation of wild plants in their place, amply illustrated by the then unparalleled photos of Tony Evans. That was my light bulb moment. That turned me from a plant scientist into a plant lover. And that's really shaped my whole future, because that got me engaged. That's the role of nature writing. We have a nature writing course here at the university with James Canton, who runs it, in the audience. That is the purpose of that sort of writing, to actually get us enthused and engaged. But of course, we do have to look at other sources of information as well, more regulated information, more scientific information perhaps, but that which has been distilled through experience. And on a very prosaic level, I could suggest no better than actually go to Beth Chatto's website and look at our A to Z listing of genera, which as of 6 months ago now has each of those genera has a paragraph about the ecological value of all the plants we offer for sale. So how it fits in with wildlife that chooses to use our gardens. It's a resource for everyone. It's a resource that's free, and it's something that I think could help a lot of people, because it's gone from the sort of research we were hearing about yesterday, which often doesn't trickle down from the scientific literature until someone comes along and distills it with interest and experience into a form that then people can use for free.
Yeah, good. And it's about this information that's accessible. I think that's quite nice that you're suggesting things that people can actually access, because there is a lot of the academic literature that you do need to be employed by a university, or that people do need to read, but it's harder to get. Yeah. Joe, what do you recommend?
Well, yeah, I mean, to that point, I was thinking about it as these guys were talking. I was thinking, well, what's the book that I would recommend? And it would be Braiding Sweetgrass, really, by Robin Wall Kimmerer. But actually, what I'd really recommend is really trusting your gut and getting out there and getting the experience, being in the place. Being in the place, watching, getting empirical experience of what we all know that climate change and what's happening in the environment means an increased unpredictability. So nothing can be really set in stone anymore. And even if it was in the first place, that was a false doctrine that we were following. So let's try and replace kind of like textbook says this, textbook says that, textbook says the other with experience. And to my mind, that means going back into place and really trying to experience what's going on there and trying to then lead that into more experimentation and being happy to experiment. So I'll go back again to trying to not necessarily use different plants, but also just trying to experiment with lots of different plants, and that means going back to seed, going back to small plants, allowing a certain amount of movement of plants, allowing a certain amount of autonomy in plants, allowing plants to self-direct, self-pollinate, open-pollinate, make relationships with indigenous microorganisms. Let's face it, plants have been in the world and interacting with indigenous microorganisms for millions and hundreds of millions of years. We've been here for a blip. Yeah. We do not understand. I think we understand like 1% of what's going on. I mean, if that. So we've got to kind of get out of the way to let them do their processes themselves and work it out themselves, because they're much better, as Eddie was saying, at problem solving than we are. But in that context, then we need to understand that we're not going to be able to control that whole thing. We're not going to be able to say, here's a planting, and it will always stay like this picture that we are presenting to you, Mr. Client.
Yeah.
Isn't this nice? We're going to have to sort of say, this is about buying into a process that's goal-driven. It's not kind of outcome-driven. And the goal is to get to this kind of joyful place where things might happen that we don't expect, but they will be really exciting. Yeah. And that's where gardeners are so important to this whole process. We cannot just put a load of plants in and expect them now to look after themselves. Gardeners are about this dynamic, evolving process. If we're going to have these dynamic, evolving, unpredictable gardens, then gardeners are going to be the key to managing those places.
Yeah. And that's going to be discussed later, which I'm looking forward to.
And I'm very much looking forward to it, because they are the keystone species.
Yeah. So when I was a student, which seems a long time ago now, it was about looking into other people's gardens. This is how you knew what worked well. Like, we're sort of, it's all these ideas that we've always had. And So, I mean, is this what you're all saying now, is actually, like, look at where you live, I use the term winners and losers, or winners and decliners, and I know now you're going to argue with me because I'm now putting a right and a wrong, but some things are winning and some things are declining, let's say. But is this how we're learning, is now just actually getting out and looking?
Yes, it is. I mean, winners and losers, not necessarily in the garden world in terms of the plants, but in terms of the things that visit those plants. You know, the insects, the biggest barometer out there, they are winners and losers at the same time. The world is warming up. Insects need warmth, so it gives them greater activity. However, climate change isn't just about getting warmer, it's getting more extreme. So the extremes of drought, the extremes of cold, etc., etc. The extremes had adverse effects upon those insect populations. One of the reasons for the things that Joe's just been talking about in terms of nature depletion. So, you know, the effects of climate change as experienced by the insects is really significant. If, at the risk of conflating weather and climate, this year we've seen really poor populations of insects. And I think that is down to the fact that this winter, the previous winter, wasn't cold enough. The entomopathogenic fungi, which would normally be killed off by frost, hard frosts, simply weren't killed off. So the fungi gobbled up all the caterpillars, basically. That's why there's no butterflies. So, you know, there are so many complex things happening. The warmer winters that we're experiencing means that insects are not going into hibernation anymore in many cases. Now, British countryside absolutely crap for producing nectar and pollen between October and March. It's up to us as gardeners to actually fill that nectar and pollen gap. We need to do that, and we can look into other people's gardens locally, hyper-locally, but also in conceptual gardens further in other parts of the world to see how we can fill that nectar and pollen gap by putting in mahonias and other things which fill that nectar gap. The insects need it. Okay, the countryside will catch up in the future eventually, but it may have gone through a mass extinction event first.
Yeah.
We are going to prevent that.
Yeah. Okay, there's screens flashing at me and I think people are ready for coffee, but I think the aim of this session for all of you was to keep us excited, because I think there are all these checklists now of, like, I know in Norway and in other countries, it's like you must use 30% native plants, you must do this, you must do that. But I suppose we've got to make sure that we still keep thinking about design, about people, about biodiversity, and that actually we don't get bombarded with all the kind of spreadsheet of problems, that we're still excited about plants. And I do believe going outdoors and seeing is the best way to do that.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.